I'm seeing and hearing a general consensus from Chicago Bears fans that in the NFL draft, you want the Bears to take an offensive tackle at 9, get a really good blocker for Justin Fields, and figuring out everything else later in the draft. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to take the offensive tackle there.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on the journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. On the show today, we look past the first round a little bit and look beyond the offensive tackle discussion that seems to be at the center of a lot of Bears draft talk, right? Most mock drafts have Paris Johnson Jr. from Ohio State or Peter Skoronski from Northwestern or even, Broderick Jones from Georgia, who we talked about a bit last week. And that's a fine draft strategy for the Bears. But what if not offensive tackle in first round? What if they wait in that regard? And why, not that this is like the path they should take, but why it might be a good path to wait on the offensive tackle in particular. That it's important, but does it need to be the 9th overall pick? Is that the best use of what the Bears have there in the draft? We'll look at what the different dynamics might be that play into where you take a tackle in this draft class in particular, and we'll get to know a little bit better some of the other offensive tackle prospects that haven't gotten as much attention. Not the first round guys, but really the second and maybe even early third round guys, where the Bears have those 3 picks between 53, 61, and 64. We talked about it a little bit last week in a couple of different ways, right? We talked about Broderick Jones as a dark horse option in the first round, the Georgia offensive tackle, and compared him to Paris Johnson Jr. and Peter Skoronski. And we also talked about the need for the Chicago Bears to get some sort of, not only one, but multiple difference makers, playmakers, players that can come in and have high impacts, even if it's not right in their rookie season, but be those kind of big time players that really have an effect on the roster that ripples beyond just their own position. And one of the arguments in that discussion is offensive tackle is great. The Bears need an offensive tackle. And if you get an offensive tackle at 9, you'll feel good about it. Paris Johnson Jr., great player. Just solid pick. You'll be happy. Peter Skoronski has the arm length question, but he's going to be a good football player. It's just a matter of where. No one's going to be mad if the Bears draft Paris Johnson or Peter Skoronski. Broderick Jones, maybe some people might feel like it's a reach, but you're probably going to get a good player and you'll probably be fine. And that's a fine, solid type, 9th overall pick. Sure. We'll take what feels like a fairly sure thing at a very big position of need. But it also feels to me like when you're picking in the top 10, I want a guy that's going to give you a little bit something more. I want something special. I want a top 10 pick. And when you think about the NFL, a couple of things. One, we talked about this last week, never has there been a game in which a right tackle has took over the game. That right tackle dominated the game and changed the game with how good he was at right tackle. Certainly an offensive tackle can shut down an opposing pass rusher and make a big impact in any individual game, yes. But it doesn't quite compare to when, a cornerback takes over and makes a big interception. A pass rusher takes over and gets multiple sacks and dominates a game. A wide receiver has one of those games where he just goes off and carries his team and leads them to victory. Offensive tackles just aren't, their position naturally is just not something that is close enough to the ball itself to be able to have that type of impact. And so I look and I wonder, like, is there an offensive tackle in this class that feels like a top 10 pick? Certainly we've seen tackles be drafted really high in previous drafts, and you're like, yeah, sometimes there's a really good offensive tackle that's just like, yep, you got to have him. He's really solid. He's your bookend guy, and he's going to be good to go. I don't know that this draft class has that specifically, right? Like Paris Johnson, Peter Skronsky, they're good players for sure, but it's not like that blue chip, Joe Thomas at the top of this draft. The first name that kind of comes to mind. It feels like we haven't had one of those in quite some time. It's good offensive tackles, but not like great offensive tackles. And like I think back, I've been looking back at some previous drafts to compare like offensive linemen taken into the top 10. Like one of them that jumped out right away was Mike McGlinchey from the San Francisco 49ers, who the Bears pursued in free agency, 9th overall pick to the 49ers. And like McGlinchey's been a very good offensive tackle for them. But does he strike you as a guy who's like, oh man, like that's a top 10 pick? That guy right there, he plays like a top 10 pick. Not really. I mean, there's a reason they let him go in free agency. He wanted a lot of money, but you pay a guy who plays like a top 10 pick, right? I mean, like comparatively, other players in that top 10, Roquan Smith is a guy who plays like a top 10 pick. Josh Allen with the Bills, of course. Bradley Chubb with the Broncos, then the Dolphins. Saquon Barkley was a top 10 pick, and of course, Quentin Nelson with the Colts. Clearly one of the best guards in football. Like that's a top 10 pick offensive lineman where it's just like, yep, you draft him. He's a Pro Bowler through and through. That's your guy. Okay. Since then, other offensive linemen that have been drafted in the top 10, Andrew Thomas for the Giants was bad his first couple of seasons and then was all pro this year. So it finally kind of came together after two or three seasons there in New York. Penei Sewell with the Lions went 7th overall, and he struggled a little bit, but still is good. But, it's not like Penei Sewell is like this dominant top 10 pick offensive tackle that you just got to have. Like, we thought of him that way in that draft. He wondered if he'd go number 1 or top 5. Like, he was sort of viewed in more of that light. Clearly the top tackle in that draft. But he doesn't have this, I don't know that he's having the same, like, top 10 pick impact on that team. And I even think back to last year with the Panthers taking Ikem Ekwonu, the first offensive tackle out of the board out of North Carolina State, was a big surprise and I think a reach at that point. But Evan Neal taken right after with the Giants, like both of those guys, and Charles Cross with the Seahawks, all 3 top 10 picks, none of them like stepped in and dominated. And that's not the only way to measure their success, but it just feels to me like, are you getting as much ROI using a top 10 pick on an offensive lineman, which is really important, but are they as much of a difference maker as other guys we see go in the top 10? Compared to like last year, would you rather have Evan Neal for the Giants or Garrett Wilson from the Jets or Kevon Thibodeau or Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley? Like we see other players at more premium, high impact positions in the top 10 ultimately feel like a little bit better use of like getting more out of that pick because you feel like you can wait and get good offensive tackles later on, whether that includes waiting until the 2nd or 3rd round or even just trading down. And we'll look at that as a possibility and where I think that may be a better fit if you really want to take an offensive tackle first. Maybe don't do it with the 9th overall pick specifically. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is here to provide easy and affordable online therapy. It is an important part of my own personal mental health regime is to have online therapy. I do it every single week. I meet with a therapist. We talk through things going on in life, and it helps me be my absolute best. I like to think of it like I go to the gym to keep my body in shape, not because my body is broken, but just because I want it to be at its best. And I go to therapy, not because my brain is completely broken and I'm in crisis at all times, but because I want to be my best and feel my best. And BetterHelp is here to help you feel better. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try because it's entirely online, it's convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We want BetterHelp for the Chicago Bears offensive line. And given how close in proximity that is to Justin Fields, I totally understand wanting to use the 9th overall pick or wherever the Bears are going to pick in the first round on that position. And I, again, want to reiterate, like, I will not be disappointed if they use a first-round pick on any of those 3 offensive tackles, really, that we talked about. Those will be fine picks. It's just about, are you getting the most return on your investment using your draft capital in the way that will best benefit your football team? And it feels to me like, while Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, and Peter Skoronski all have a lot to like and all should be pretty good players, they don't necessarily strike me as like the dominant top 10 pick type tackles. And to me, it feels more like we see year in and year out, like the sweet spot for drafting an offensive lineman, but especially an offensive tackle, I think, tends to be more like the middle to later part of the round, right? Guards and centers is more like late first, early second, but offensive tackles is like mid to late first round. I think anywhere from pick like, I don't know, it's arbitrary, right? 12 to 25, 15 to 25, 15 to 30, right? I mean, it kind of depends on each year's draft class. But you think about this year, right? Paris Johnson, Peter Skoronski, Broderick Jones, and then probably Darnell Wright from Tennessee, probably be the next offensive tackle in there. Like those 4 guys are kind of the 4 that all are viewed as pretty much consensus first-round picks. There could be a guy like Anton Harrison from Oklahoma, who we'll talk about a little bit later on, is a guy that some people have sneaking into the end of the first round there because offensive tackle is a valuable position and well worth a first-round pick. I again want to make that clear, but it's a matter of how much you're truly getting and where you're getting it. Like, is Paris Johnson Jr., so much better than Peter Skoronski or Broderick Jones that you got to take him at 9 because you're so worried that, if I trade down to 14, somebody's going to take Paris Johnson and I'm going to have to take Broderick Jones and be disappointed. Like, to me, when you look at those 3 guys and also Darnell Wright too, I'll throw him in there. Like, I don't think I would take Wright with the 9th overall pick. I think he's a decent, not a lot, but enough of a step down from those guys. But if I traded down to 20, which seems unrealistic, but even I went as far as 20 and ended up with Darnell Wright there and 3 offensive tackles come off the board between 9 and 20, I still feel like that's a good pick. And I don't feel like it's that much worse than had I got any of those other 3 guys that I was looking at with 9. And if I'm jumping from 9 back to 20 or whatever, you might be getting a future first-round pick in that, or at least, second-round pick, some sort of major draft capital. And to me, that's kind of what it comes down to a little bit with some of these guys. It's like, if there's a blue-chip player there at 9 that's a high-impact cornerback, high-impact wide receiver, high-impact pass rusher, one of these positions that has a little bit more of that, take over a game ability, I'm taking it there. And if that's not there, then it's like, okay, there's 3 or 4 offensive tackles that I like. Why do I have to stay here and pick my favorite of a group that I'm all pretty even on when I could trade down? In theory, it takes 2 to trade down. Somebody has to want to trade up, but it could trade down, still get one of 4 guys I like pretty similarly, and add whatever draft capital I would have got. And to me, I feel like the draft capital of trading down and getting the slightly lesser tackle, you might not have got your first choice, plus the future draft picks, versus staying at 9 and taking whatever tackle you wanted. Like, I don't think you're missing very much. I think you're gaining a lot by being able to move down. Like, I just think we think about this draft range, right? I like to use the historical comparisons since we were talking about, Mike McGlinchey as a 9th overall pick by comparison. You look back at other offensive tackles that have gone like that relative range in the draft. Andre Dillard from the Eagles and Titus Howard from the Texans were 22 and 23 a couple of years ago. We've seen Austin Jackson with the Dolphins. Tristan Wirfs went 13 to the Buccaneers. Mekhi Becton from the Jets went 11. So it doesn't have to be that far out of the top 10. But you're kind of seeing like that being where more of the cluster is a little bit later on in these drafts. Christian Darrisaw a couple of years ago with the Minnesota Vikings goes 23rd. Elijah Vera Tucker played tackle in college, but he went 14. Rashawn Slater with the Chargers, college teammate, or I guess, sort of past college teammate of Peter Skoronski at Northwestern. He went 13th overall. Like, to me, that like the early teens, 12, 13, 14 is where like the first offensive tackle, if there's not a blue chip Joe Thomas at the top, that's the range you want to get into if you really want to get the first guy. But you can get down into the 15s, into the 20s, and still get one of the 2 or 3 or 4 best first-round talent offensive tackles in this draft. Last year, we saw Trevor Penning from Northern Iowa go 19th overall. We saw Tyler Smith from Tulsa go 24th overall. And it feels like those teams are just as happy with the offensive tackles they drafted as maybe the Panthers are with Akeem Ekwonu that they drafted 6th overall in that draft. Not that those players are on equal footing, but after 1 year, it's not like, oh man, Ekwonu in Carolina is so good, and they got this absolute stud left tackle in the top 5 of the draft that's just going to be dominant for them from year on and year out. He had a fine rookie season. He was solid, but he wasn't like 6th overall pick great. And if there's not a tackle in this class that fits that mold, then why take one at 9? Certainly if no one wants to trade up, you just can't find anybody that's willing to give you much value at all to move down, which is a very real possibility. Fine. Take the tackle at 9 and you're happy with that. You feel like we got a good player. And at the end of the day, that's the goal of the 9th overall pick, right? I'm not saying the Bears should swing for the fences on the riskiest pick possible to just go for the home run, but just understand that like offensive tackle value tends to be placed a little bit differently than top 10 when we're talking about guys of this very good caliber, but not the elite caliber just yet. And so to me, there's more value in taking Devon Witherspoon from Illinois or Jackson Smith-Njigba, the wide receiver from Ohio State, or if Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech falls there. Like those types of players feel to me like more guys that can take over those spots, while the offensive tackles just aren't. So if you're at 9 and those impact players are gone, you take the tackle because that's your best player available at that point. Or if those guys are gone, you can trade down, I suppose, too. But it just doesn't feel to me like 9th overall is like the best place to take these tackles, or the best use of that 9th overall pick is not necessarily getting the offensive tackles here. To me, there's enough offensive tackle talent elsewhere in this draft that you don't have to take one at 9, and you can still feel like in the second round, you'll have the opportunity to get a day 1, week 1 starting right tackle still in this draft. So let's go through some of the names that could be there at 53, or you could wait and take it 61 or 64, or maybe guys you might want to move up from 53 earlier in the second round to make sure you get one of them next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Tell you what, baseball season is back, and there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. So if your bet doesn't win, they will give you up to $1,000 back in bonus bets so you can keep playing at FanDuel. For baseball season, for the NBA playoffs, just right here around the corner, season's just wrapping up now, to the NFL draft. You can bet on who's going to be the first offensive lineman taken, the first receiver taken, what position the Bears are going to take with their pick, and so much more. You just got to go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in your no-sweat first bet. It's FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball, the NBA, and NFL. If not in the first round, the quality of offensive tackles certainly drops, but it's not so bad, and it still feels to me like you can get a guy who you can rely on as a day 1 starter. I mean, we think about Tevin Jenkins being a second-round pick, he was very early in the second round, but a second-round pick to be an offensive tackle for the Chicago Bears. And I think it's like maybe not quite the hype. Like we got excited about when the Bears were able to land Tevin Jenkins. It was like, whoa, like they moved up and they got a really good player there that felt like a first-round pick that had fallen out of the first round. Certainly if someone like Darnell Wright falls like that, I would absolutely move up for him. And a guy that I think would probably end up sneaking into the first round just because offensive linemen are valuable, but Anton Harrison from Oklahoma is, you see him in mock drafts a lot, like as this borderline first-round, second-round guy. And if he falls to the second, that'd be a guy I would consider moving up from 53 to go get, because he moves so well for a big man. Like he gets out of his stance and flows nicely. Like he's got very good balance. Like the feet kind of stay underneath him well. And it just he makes it look easy to stay in front of offensive from pass rushers. Like from the waist down, it's gorgeous. And as a result, you see him really thrive in pass protection in particular, being able to mirror guys and stay in front of them. But above the waist, there's his hands, they don't pack as much of a punch. Like you'd like to see some more power, some more strength from him. I think there's room to add strength in the weight room for him. And so you don't see him drive guys as well in the running game, but the Bears like the more agile, mobile offensive linemen. They don't need them to be maulers as much. So I think a guy like Harrison would be a good fit for a lot of what Chicago is looking for in their offensive tackles. And certainly he's an option if you trade down particularly far in the first, but also to trade up. He's not going to make it to 53. That would be very surprising to me, but never say never. A lot of strange things happen. It's really hard to predict what happens after the first round. Another guy that I don't think is going to make it to 53, but I'd be interested in is DeWan Jones, the Ohio State right tackle, the opposite of Paris Johnson there. We've talked about him a handful of times throughout this offseason. We saw him in person at the Senior Bowl this year. 6'8", 6'9", 375 pounds, just an absolute mammoth of a human being. But it's like when you see him in person, he's almost slim. Like he's almost slender. Like the most slender 375-pound man you're ever going to see. He does not have a gut. It's thick muscle. It's lean. He's a lean 375 pounds with super long arms. And I just think for his size, I think he moves pretty well. He doesn't move well in general, but like his feet are definitely a weakness when it comes to speed rushers. But he also knows how to set really far out so that speed's not going to get around him. I think there's still room for him to like grow in that area, but like he knows his weakness there, right? He knows, yes, I'm humongous, but when he gets his hands on you, it's a black hole. You just get absorbed and he just throws you out the club. Like that's how it goes. He is a butt kicker. Like he's just a mean, big, strong son of a gun who I think would be fun to watch at right tackle. Maybe he's not as, like I said, he moves well. He's not as agile. The Bears like lighter offensive linemen, so I don't know that he's Ryan Poles' perfect fit, but I still think he'd be worth the opportunity. I think he's a good player, and I think he's a dark horse first-round pick as well, if we're being honest here. But I don't think he's going to be there at 53, but an option I would absolutely consider as a day one starting right tackle. Or Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse. Really smart, experienced. I mean, he was like a 3-4 year starter there. Really good at like picking up stunts and knowing where pass rushers are going to be. Like eyes are always in the right place. Nothing surprises him. Nothing gets by him in that way. And he's just like steady. You wonder if maybe there's a little bit of a low ceiling there. Like he's not an elite athlete, but he's a fine athlete. He's not like super strong, but he's not weak. He's good. And it feels like he's a little bit rounded out or a little bit developed, right? Where you're not going to come into the NFL and like tweak his techniques that he takes this next level. Like to me, Bergeron might never be a Pro Bowler, but he can be a really solid offensive tackle for you for a while. Like you can do better than Bergeron, but you're not going to be unhappy with Bergeron in your life. Like he's never going to be your worst starter, but he's never going to be your best starter either, hopefully. I mean, and you're in a bad place if he's your best starter, but he's also never going to be your worst starter, and that's okay. And for a second-round pick, I think that'd be fine. I think the Bears don't need an elite right tackle, right? They just need good players across the board, and I think Bergeron would be able to handle that pretty well. He, I think, would be a really solid pick at 53. If you can still get him at 61 or 64, absolutely. Then I think there's a little bit of a drop-off from Bergeron to a guy like Jalen Duncan from Maryland, who another Senior Bowl product. The Bears love Senior Bowl. DeWan Jones, Matthew Bergeron, Jalen Duncan, all three Senior Bowl players. Eberflus and Poles have both raved about getting to see these guys in action at the Senior Bowl. So it wouldn't surprise me if one of those three ends up as a Chicago Bear just from that exposure that way and the need for offensive tackles. But like Duncan, a little bit on the lighter side, fluid in terms of like the hips and his feet moving underneath him. Like to me, he looked a little bit like top heavy. Like his legs seemed kind of skinny chicken legs for an offensive tackle. But I think as a result, there's room to add some more lower body bulk there where he can generate some more power, because I don't know that he's quite that kind of mauler either. And he doesn't seem to have that like violent mentality that you want in an offensive tackle. Like he's not as excited about putting a guy in the dirt, but it's not that he's soft. He's just not, he's not that mean, nasty guy that you look for, which is fine. It's not a huge red flag, but it's something. It matters there. But more so like he's got really small hands and they're not super powerful. And so like sometimes like sustaining blocks, in the way where like DeWan Jones gets his hands on you and then he's never letting go and it's done. Jalen Duncan struggles with that a little bit, and so like he has to work more to keep a block going, and it has to do more with his feet because his hands haven't been able to be consistently like powerful and effective enough. So that's something he needs to improve on, and why he's more in the third round type range. Could sneak into the second, I think, but third round type range, depending on what the run is on offensive tackles in this draft. And one more I'll throw into this general vicinity. Tyler Steen from Alabama was their left tackle, transferred from Vanderbilt after a few years there. Like Peter Skoronski, he's got shorter arms, so it's possible he may end up as a guard, but it's easier to take that risk in the second round than it is at 9th overall in terms of positional value. Steen also moves pretty well. He's got like good feet, but he almost moves like too well to where he doesn't keep his feet under him enough. They move really well, but they're just all over the place. And then as a result, like he doesn't get a good clean base out of it, and so he sacrifices some strength as a result, and sometimes is himself like off balance because he's trying to move too much, and he can just like slow it down a little bit. Like the feet move well enough that they don't need to be going so fast because they can keep up at a slower pace, right? He doesn't need to be trying so hard. Just slow it down, son. Get your legs under you and be firm in that spot. So like, I think there's room for him to clean up and get a little bit stronger as a result of that, and then have a better player than he looks now. But otherwise, like, he moves so well, he's going to be good in pass protection, and the Bears like linemen who move well, but the shorter arms become a little bit of a question there, and that's why, again, like, third, maybe even fourth-ish round range for guys like that. Varying levels of confidence in each one as a day one starter, but I think all of them have the potential to come into training camp, play well, win a battle with Larry Borum and Alex Leatherwood, and be a day one starting right tackle for the Chicago Bears. Like, I think they all have the capabilities to do so. You certainly prefer like an Anton Harrison and a Bergeron more than like a Duncan and a Steen, but you're not panicking if that's the option that you get. And there's also free agents and veterans you can bring in as well. So like, I just don't know that 9 has to be the place to do it. You've got options if you trade down. You've got options in the second and third rounds, or to trade up in the second round to go get one of these offensive tackles and use that first round pick on a more premium player, premium position, high impact difference maker. That's why I say, like, you don't have to use one on the tackles at the first round. We'd be happy with them, but can we aim higher? Can we do better? Let's explore all of our options here. That's what I like to do on the Locked On Bears podcast. Explore all of our options and maybe challenge a little bit of the consensus and the conventional thinking that we're seeing among Bears fans right now. Not to be contrarian, but just to think critically and say, okay, well, what if we approach this from a different way? So I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoy the way we try and look at things a little bit differently here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts or on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. Don't forget to check out all of our other Locked On podcasts for your second listen today. The Locked On Podcast Network is your team every day. That includes all your Chicago sports teams: Bears, Bulls, Cubs, White Sox, Blackhawks, Northwestern, Illini as well. But also, if you're fans of teams not from Chicago as well, you're more than welcome to check out all of our Locked On shows. But just make sure you come on back tomorrow and make Locked On Bears your first listen once again, because you have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.